During your visit to Brussels, one of the main concerns these days for the European Union is the renewed drone incursions at the borders with the European Union when it comes to the Baltic states, Finland. What's your take on that?
Well, Russia poses a huge threat to the security of the European Union, and it was obvious that Russia will try to intimidate everyone, and mainly the European Union. And Russia's electronic warfare tries actually to distract Ukrainian drones, and in this way to send these drones to the sovereign soil of our European partners. And this is a part of Russia's proxy war against the European Union and NATO. They want to intimidate the people of the European Union, and they believe that in this case, they will urge Europeans to turn its back on Ukrainians, which will never come to fruition. So my take is that they are sending to all of us a very clear message. We need to create a stronger and better and more secure union. I mean the European Union, and Ukraine could be the best and the perfect contributor to the security of the European Union.
But do you see some of the threats being renewed and reinforced? Because, for example, last week, not only there were so many drone incursions, the air raid alerts in the Baltic countries were ringing, and this is shocking for the NATO countries of the European Union as well. So there is like a renewed push from Moscow to intimidate. Why now?
Here is the thing. Putin is losing the war, because he expected to take over Ukraine 12 years ago. Then he waged an all-out war 5 years ago, and he was actually excited to grab Kyiv in 3 days or 3 weeks. In the end, he lost around 1.5 million of the Russian soldiers or Russian cannon fodder. So his economy is nosediving, and there is some kind of skimmering even inside Russia. What is the best way out for Putin? And my reading of Putin is very clear. The only option for him, which is on the table, is actually to escalate the situation. And the reason is very clear. It is about his physical stance, his physical ability to survive as Mr. Putin, and his political ability to survive as the president of Russia. So he will escalate. That's the point number one. The second one, look, we are living in a completely different world. And it's obvious that that's a new type of warfare. And Europeans have to realize that this war relates not only to Ukraine. Putin, and not only Putin, but all these axis of evil under the auspices of China, they are going after an entire Western world. It means that they are going after every single European citizen, every single European country. So, and Ukraine actually today is on the front line of defending both Ukraine, because we are defending ourselves, and defending the European Union. So that's my second message would be that we need to have strong Europe, a kind of European defense union in collaboration with the NATO, because I strongly object any idea of making NATO an obsolete. But on the other hand, we need to do our best to help Ukraine to win this war. This would be a game changer. If Ukraine wins the war, we're going to live in a completely new world, which would be better than this one.
But these warnings about the war, including the proxy war raging from Moscow towards Europe and towards the Western world, this is something that Ukraine has been warning the Europeans for over 4 years, certainly since the beginning of the full-scale invasion, let alone since the beginning of the first invasion in 2014. But it's only now that the Europeans do seem more concerned once they do have the air raid alerts on their territory.
Well, this is the way sometimes politics works. People, they do share some kind of sentiments towards Ukrainians, and they do understand that the threat is real. But the real understanding comes only in case if you feel it, if you see it, if you can listen to an air raid siren. That's the way the psychology of every human being works. And let me reiterate once again, we are living in a completely new world, and On the one hand, I wish every single European citizen to be in safety. On the other hand, I wish all of us to realize that you folks can be safe only in one case, if we as Ukrainians win this war, period.
Europeans now also seem to believe that they might have a strong and convincing voice in any sort of a diplomatic process with Putin, with the conversations happening around Brussels and the capitals on who could be the EU envoy, the EU negotiator. Would this help? Can they reason with Moscow?
Frankly speaking, I admire all these kind of diplomatic chats and talks. Who's going to present the European Union first? The EU has its High Commissioner, which is Kaja Kallas.
Would Putin accept Kaja Kallas?
And that's an issue. And the thing is that I'm not sure that Putin is ready to accept anyone. What Putin is ready to accept, he is ready to accept Ukraine's and actually European surrender. And we have to realize this. It is not about the names. It's not about some kind of international or domestic politics. It is about policy. What kind of policy we're going to pursue towards Russia? The only language Putin understands is the language of force and strength. Let me remind you that in 2021, a number of European and American leaders tries to reach out to Putin to convince him not to do what he already decided to do. And it was actually an act of aggression against Ukraine. And I was frankly even astonished with the latest call of President Macron. So I do understand that he acted in a good faith, trying to reach out to another dictator who is actually subordinate to war criminal Putin, I mean Lukashenko, trying to persuade him, to convince, whatever. It doesn't work. In this new contemporary world, words don't matter. Words matter only in case if they are supported by very strong actions. And that's the very reason why what is needed for Ukraine and for everyone in Europe is to realize that Putin will react only in case if we do our best to drain his economy, to drain his military, and actually to drain his political clout and political influence. And if Europeans, maybe with Americans, maybe a miracle is to happen, who knows, fingers crossed, will press on Chinese, because China still has an upper hand in this war. And China is an accomplice. I want to be very clear about this, because they say they are neutral. That is not true. They are strategic partners with Putin. They signed a number of deals. They provided the bloodline for Putin's Russia, both financial and dual-use materials, which is actually military. They issued this blatant joint statement a few days ago during the state visit of Putin and Xi. It was completely anti-Western, anti-American, and anti-Ukrainian. So if we find a way how to press on China, or how to collaborate with China in order to press on Russia, the chances are very low, but still they exist. So this could actually drive the way to find some kind of, not a common ground, but to find some kind of way how to hold real talks with Putin. Because we never had any kind of real talks. And the Americans, they were always saying that, look, we are in deliberations with Russia and this is the peace talk.
The Alaska summit.
Oh, gosh, it has nothing to do with the real peace talks. It was a special KGB operation in order just to outweigh both Americans and Ukrainians and to circumvent sanctions and actually to drive a wedge between Americans and Europeans. And now it became obvious, even for Americans, that Russians were not eager to hold any kind of talks, despite the fact that, for example, I was very vocal from the first days of these so-called sham talks.
You met Putin.
Correct.
You are one of the very few people who actually in person met Vladimir Putin.
And in the entire his clique, his entourage, for everyone, all these contemporary of Ribbentrop, which is Lavrov and all these folks.
What's your take as somebody who actually met Russia's president? Should there be the negotiating table, let's say, with the EU represented either by Kaja Kallas or Antonio Costa? That's another name that's been circulating in Brussels. What will Putin do?
Let me go back to square one. First, please do not underestimate this war criminal. He's not an idiot. He's a KGB operative. he has changed definitely dramatically in the last decade, no doubt. But he still has quite effective top military and security brass. So he's less strategic, he's more tactical. And he always has the sense of whether you are weak or you are strong. So he makes a sniff test of each person he meets. But whether we have an ability and whether do we have a chance to outplay him, yes, we do, no doubt. But it all depends on the personality who is to talk to Putin, and whether this personality, whether this high-profile political figure would have an additional ammo that supports his talk. Otherwise, it's going to be just a cheap talk. So let me go back once again. I am not really focused on the names. I'm focused on the policy. Mm-hmm. I'm focused on what kind of strong arguments this special envoy would have in his portfolio. And whether this envoy would be just as a one isolated single person, or an entire NATO bloc would stand behind him. And we need an entire Western world who is to support and to underpin this kind of negotiator. But let me remind you once again, Putin is not eager. He's not ready for any kind of talks at this particular juncture. Maybe he would accept some kind of negotiator with the only very simple and obvious reason: to buy time and to, once again, to outwait and to cheat us.
Thank you.
Thank you.